not argued. No, we're told out of nowhere. Homer tells us how this fellow uh, Melampus came to be in the city of Pylos. And it doesn't seem to have any great relevance to Telemachus, who's the character we're really talking about here. He's preparing to sail back to Ithaca to see his father, to rejoin his father, Odysseus. Just sort of at it. But the thing is, Homer does that all the time. In the Iliad, almost any time someone's killed, almost any time someone's introduced, we're told his father's name for one thing, because the ancient Greeks had patronymics. So you're almost always referred to. You can be referred to by your own given name, but you can also be referred to by your patronymic, your whoever's son name. They didn't have last names. So you're told, Odysseus can be referred to as Odysseus, he can be referred to as Laertiades because he's the son of Laertes. And sometimes both, and sometimes in reverse order. And oftentimes in the Iliad, we're told a little snippet about someone's life, how he was born and to whom and where and under what circumstances, just as he's being cut off, just as his life is ending. So here, instead, it's more life affirming. This is not a man who is going to die in battle anytime soon, we think. We're told a fairly long story about how his ancestor, this seer of Apollo, came to this land after a quarrel with his father and was favored by the king and then turned against the king. And not the most complicated Greek, but an obscure myth anyway.
How many were there?
7.
Wow, that's a record.
Yeah, not. I was expecting to see one more lady who doesn't show up as often as perhaps she might, but 7, good number anyway.
Normally it's 3 to 5, right?
I'd say 5 or 6 is pretty typical.
Right. What's the book you have in your left hand?
Well, this is Plato's Republic. I was just placing it just so on the table.
In English?
Yes. Plato's Greek is much harder than Homer's, I think.
Oh, in other words, other people who write Greek. Plato, who wrote in Greek, is more difficult to read?
Than Homer, I think. Yeah.
Why?
Well, quite simply because I'm used to Homer. but no, really, I think most people would agree with me. I think most academics would agree with me. Homer tends to be 4th semester Greek or so, where Plato tends to be 5th or 6th semester. His constructions are more difficult, more unexpected. He coins words. Philosophy is always difficult to read in any language, really, and especially in a language not your own. Homer has he has a very, very diverse vocabulary, to be sure, but he also has a lot of stock phrases. You get used to the way Homer says things. And for what it's worth, people think verse is more difficult than prose, but it's not.
Why? I mean, excuse me. In other words, Homer writes in verse?
Yes. Yep. Like Shakespeare. Not the same kind of meter, but yes, in a very constant, regular rhythm and pattern.
Well, I was going to say dilettante, but I think it's better if I say as an ignoramus. Is there such a word as ignoramus?
Yeah, sure.
Does it mean a person who is ignorant?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So as an ignoramus, I would
think...
But
it's usually used as more of an insult. Okay. I would not call you, or I would not call you that, but...
Okay. Well, I'll call myself it then. because I'm self-abusive. As an ignoramus, I find that wonderfully paradoxical, if that word is appropriate, that Shakespeare is thought to be more difficult to read because it is in verse, and where other literature written at the time of Shakespeare is in prose. The paradox being then that Homer, being in verse, in fact might be less difficult to read in Greek than Plato's Republic, which is written in prose. Now, as an ignoramus, I would hypothesize the reason for that is as follows. To write in verse in Greek requires very constricted patterns. Once pattern learned, as you have done in reading Homer frequently, it's less difficult to read than Greek written in prose, because Greek written in prose at that period of time, whether it be philosophical or not, would be clearly open to much more divergency. Do you like that hypothesis?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I do. And also, Homer, absolutely, yes, as you say. And well, and knowing something about the patterns of the poetry no doubt helps with the rhythm of the prose, but the rhythm of the prose is free. You get used to these patterns and you might find yourself thrown off as well.
Now, let's get to English. Is it considered Old English or English, Shakespeare?
Shakespeare is, so the highly technical academic term you'll see is early modern English.
Whereas Chaucer is early modern Old English?
Chaucer is Middle English.
Oh.
And not particularly early Middle English either. Chaucer is what we call Middle. Old English is, if you've heard of Beowulf.
Yes,
Beowulf
I have. But who wrote Beowulf?
We don't know.
Maybe it was a tutor. Did
Maybe.
tutors exist? No.
Well, not as far as I know. The Tudor family in Wales comes into prominence in the
early English.
In the 14th century, so when Middle English is being spoken and written. On top of which, I think in the Old English period, if there were any Tudors, well, that's the thing too, Tudor's not really a last name originally. The Welsh have patronymics like the Greeks. And it's
what does patronymics mean? You mentioned it at the beginning of our
A patronymic is a kind of surname derived from your father's name.
Father's first name?
Yes.
So in other words, your family would be Georges?
And so for the most part, you only see it in societies that don't have family names. So
suppose if your family, the Nehru family, suppose if your family had no last name, would you then be called a Georgeson?
So then my name would be Georgeson, yeah, essentially.
Oh, it would be?
Yeah.
And what would your sister's name be?
George's daughter. and you still see this actually in Iceland. In Iceland, very few people have proper surnames. They're referred to by patronymics. So Johann's daughter is Johanna's daughter. That's how they do it.
To this day?
To this day. And once upon a time.
Now, wait a moment, because I think you said that your father, George, or was it your mother, Christina, or was it your goddaughter? Do you remember that I told you my goddaughter, who's African American? I think she's my only official goddaughter. I think I have a godson. Wait, let me see. No, of course not. My goddaughter was the niece I had that took her life. She was my goddaughter also. But my goddaughter, Erica, right, was something I had mentioned to you the first time I heard that your aunt's name was Erica. So excuse me for being an ignoramus and forgetting Erica's name 2 days ago. I don't think I will ever forget it again. So getting back to Georgeonomics. So what would Christina be named? Her father's first name was Alfred. What was your grandfather's name? First name.
Somewhat ironically, George.
Well, that would be lovely. Then they would think they were actually, that's a very, very, very good example. Not ironic at all, shall we say. Let's call it your other favorite word, serendipitous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Serendipitously, then you could now use that as an example. What is it called again?
Patronymic.
So patronymics would be this. To describe your father, you would be called Georgeson. Now, to describe your mother, she would be George's daughter. But then they would think that you and your mother were brother and sister.
Yeah. Good. Yeah.
That was a good one, right? And that would be true in Iceland. Now, let's get back to Greenland, which I heard your father's buying next month in order to beat Trump to the bargain table. In Greenland, do they also do what they do in Iceland?
I don't know what they do in Greenland.
Could you find out on your computer right now before we say goodnight?
I imagine, yes.
Please
I'll
do.
check.